Thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me to Perugia. It's really nice. I haven't been there before. It starts to rain tonight.
It's Swedish weather for you.
Yeah, it is actually. It's rain from the side in Sweden, actually. My research agenda is kind of wide. It's broad. I'm into political communication, journalism, crisis communication, risk communication. Some would say that I'm all over the place. Others would say that it's a guy with many interests in research. I don't know if that's the reason why Eduardo asked me to say something about the evolution of political communication research on the European elections, the theories, the main results, and the understanding. So I give it a shot. So what I did when I got this question was that I went to my own bookshelf and some colleagues and looked what I could find about this topic. Because honestly, my work on political communication has mainly been done on national election campaigns in Sweden. I was a part of this book by Eduardo and Kevin, and I will be a part of the next book as well. So I'm moving into this field. I have done some research on it before, but I'm not a newcomer, but I'm learning. So this is what I found when I was looking into my bookshelves, and some college bookshelves, and some other stuff as well. And mind you, probably incomplete in some ways, but it's something we can discuss and see if we can actually fill the holes which I haven't been able to find. The other way around. Actually, this is a book I didn't find in the bookshelf. That's the one you were part of. Jay Blummer's book about the 1979 election campaign, about television and its effects. And as you see, I didn't find a high resolution picture on the internet either. Just a lower resolution picture. Maybe you can give one to me.
Well, I have the original.
Yeah, you have the original. So, but of course, then you have others. The 2004, let's put them all up there. Sorry about that. A number of edited books about the election from 2004 and on. Not at least, well, I have to take off my glasses. Like you, yeah, I have other glasses too, but my intention from 2004, then the Mackay 2, then the Strömberg and Kaiman and colleagues, and of course the last one about the election campaign in 2014. I just want to add something then, but first we talk about these books. The first one about news and the effects of the news, Blummer, from Perugia, and this one, I don't have a picture of this one, but that's also an important book about the European campaign, news and effects. Then you have My Intention, campaign news and voter turnout was the focus in that book. And Kaid's book, it's about campaign and news content. And then you have My Strömberg and Kay, you have campaign content and effects. And then you have Holzbacher and the year after, then you have focus on the campaign. So as you can see, focus is on campaigns or news and effects, sometimes on one part and sometimes on the other. So it's a lot of research we've been doing on these topics of the European election campaigns. And these scholars are political communication scholars. But I want to add one perspective which we sometimes miss, because there's a lot of researchers in our field of media and communication studies who study media and politics, but they don't consider themselves as political communication scholars. I have a colleague at University of Gothenburg called Mats Ekström, and he's been studying journalism for years, and he studied journalism and politics, but he wouldn't consider himself as a political communication scholar. But he's done research on European elections together with colleagues in the UK and Greece and other countries in Europe. So there's also other researchers out there not working with quantitative methods, working with qualitative and discourse analysis and so on. So you should sometimes try to broaden the perspective if you want to look into what actually researchers doing when they're studying political communication and European campaigns. That said, I was trying to take an overview of this research field and see what are they doing here, what are the theories, their perspectives, their style of comparison and so on. And of course, a lot of them mention that this is an opportunity to study different aspects of political communication. And you find that in some chapters, in some articles, using the European election campaigns for studying something, not comparing at all. And then, of course, you have an opportunity to compare political communication to country, more comparisons and so on. And as Liegenhardt and See, who's writing this in this book, they say European Parliament elections provide an excellent case for comparative research, with elections for the same institution being held simultaneously in all EU member states. Nevertheless, there has been relatively little comparative research in those election campaigns, and that has been undertaken as focused primarily on media coverage. Looking at these, you can say that 3 of these books are actually doing, I took De Vries there as an example, not the book, but there's the same research environment in Amsterdam. They've done a lot of research on European election campaigns in 1999, 2004, and onwards. But these are truly comparative studies. The others, they sometimes compare, but most of the time they study one country and then they put all these chapters of country studies into a book with and say this is a study of European elections. So comparative studies, yes, but not always so comparative. I just added some posters to lighten up the feeling here. That's a poster from UKIP. When you talk about comparing strategies, I would say that some have these kind of explorative strategies in the research, more or less see what we can find. Then you compare countries and see, is there anything out there? Then you have some sort of systematic comparison too, where you compare 2 or more countries using different theoretical approaches to explain the campaigning or the news content or the news effect. And of course the Amsterdam school, they are strictly comparative in this sense. They take one concept and then they see to what extent does that actually hold for the whole Europe or not. Why compare? When I'm looking into the literature, and as you said, you can fill the gaps when I'm missing, but a common theme I find in a lot of research is there such a thing as European public sphere or not? That's the main theme in a lot of research. Others look at tracing trends like mediatization, professionalization, negativity, and so on. And others are using this comparative approach to explaining campaigning or news or effect. So it's not that different from other political communication research, maybe except for the first one, because a lot of researchers are interested in what is actually the European public sphere and is there such a thing or not. Well, the main result is there isn't. Yeah. When you talk about explaining campaign news and effects, it could be different things that you try to compare. It could be about comparing between European Parliament election and national elections. It could be using the media political system design, regulation organizations, comparing new and old members, which could be seen as some sort of institutionalization of in European membership. Comparing central therapy with power perspective, integration into EU politics perhaps, and also party positioning in the countries, pro against EU skepticism or central fringe and so on, and to some extent also compare critical events, context factors such as economic crisis, and a lot of research that talk about political climate. I know Liegenhardt and See in this book talk about what is political climate? What political climate is trusting the EU, expand the EU, or being a recipient or the donor to the EU. That will explain some of the political climate. And I will come back to that because I think that's one of the problems I have with this research. But there's a lot of things you can compare. A lot of different strategies you can use to compare European Parliament research. And they're all fine, you know, and you find them. The theories, there's another funny poster by the way from Germany. You find almost the same thing as you find in other political communication research. It's about professionalization of campaigning, it's about mediatization, it's about negative campaigning, a lot about negative campaigning actually. Political populism, different aspects of framing, game issue framing, but not least European framing or Euroscepticism framing. Campaign style, negative campaigning again, I'll put it there, okay. Video style, personalization, visualization and so on. So different aspects of campaigning. And of course, when it comes to effects, it's agenda setting, it's framing, mobilization and so on. So it's not that different from other, I would say it's nothing new really when you look into political communication on European election. It's the same theories, and maybe this Euroscepticism or Europeanization is something that is different. So, what have been found? Will Kevin explain what FLAC means?
Criticism.
Yeah.
Polite criticism.
Huh?
Criticism.
Yeah, I know. Just want to make sure you're still awake. Yeah. Okay. When I look at the literature, what I find when I try to summarize the results is that it's still a second-order election from the voters, in terms of parties, in terms of the media, but it tends to get a little bit more attention over the years, even if the voter turnout declines, as you said. Low turnouts and thermostat or barometer elections, which you also mentioned that the government most of the time loses support in these elections. They tend to be more national oriented than European. Most research that I've read say that there is no such thing as European public sphere. It's a national perspective on the European election campaigns. It's a rising negativity, both in terms of campaigns, but also in terms of news coverage. Tend to be a little bit more professionalized over the years, but still less professionalized compared to national elections. So it's a lot of different trends you can see. Maybe more attention, but more negativity. Focus still on national elections. Maybe the 2014 was a little bit different, where the economic crisis was a general theme over the whole election. That is actually Sweden Democrats in Sweden. Their poster, "Give us Sweden back," was from 2005. When you try to explain differences found in the results, in terms of campaigning, in terms of news coverage, and to some extent also effects, you find that party position matters. Fringe parties use more negative campaigning, for example. So fringe parties, party position matters. And electoral system matters for styling content. Some found that conflict frames are more prevalent in countries with proportional representation because there are more parties who can actually be negative. Institutionalization and recipient state matters, less negative in new member states, for example. So there are a number of factors that seems to be important when we try to explain why we found differences. If we look at this book, here, it's live here. Yeah. Economic frame on the campaign in many countries, as I said, 2014 campaign maybe was a little bit different compared to the earlier ones. Brussels is used as a shortcut for negative and critical view on the European Union. Personalization, yes, but it's domestic, except for Merkel, who was used in negative campaigning in many countries, especially in the southern Europe. It wasn't a European campaign, local issues or Euroscepticism, maybe with an economic theme added to that. More negative campaign in Southern Europe, least in Eastern Europe. And also that will be explained by the economic crisis. So, what is different? Because I'm more aware, know more about national election campaigns and how they are studied. In the news coverage, political bias is not studied at all. That's a theme that is actually non-existent in European election campaign studies. And there's not so much focus on different media outlets, television, comparing television, newspaper, radio, and so on. And that is kind of different because what most researchers try to do, they try to grasp the whole campaign in one country and say something about it, not pay attention to the differences between television or radio or newspapers and so on. So they try to grasp the whole campaign and say something about the general campaign. And that's, of course, because you try to compare campaigning in different countries. And when we look at citizen campaigns, they are not still focused on social media campaigns, and we'll probably discuss that more later today. So, where do we go from here? What didn't I find, and which I thought maybe that could be interesting to have when we talk about European election campaign research? I sometimes miss data sets from 1979 and onwards so that we can actually be sure about developments of campaigning in Europe. There are some in Amsterdam, but it's scattered. I know in Sweden we have from 1995 actually when we entered the European Union, but I don't think we actually have news content coded for 2014. I would like to see more comparison between national campaigns and European campaigns and see to what extent do they actually differ more systematically. Social media, of course. How to trace populism, which we haven't really coded yet in spots, ads, and posters. How to trace immigration, integration, and campaigning, which we haven't really done so much research on yet. Another thing is how to define political culture or national political context, because a lot of chapters in this book, and I have done that myself, I'm pleading guilty here, number of times when we can explain really the differences, we tend to say that, well, these are due to national political context or political culture, and we rarely define what we actually mean by that. When you compare and look at something, it always depends on where you stand. If you stand inside Europe and comparing all the countries, you might find differences. But what if we compared European campaigns, the whole of them, and compare them to campaigns somewhere else? Maybe they are quite similar. Because we tend to see when we compare European election campaigns saying that there's no such thing as European public sphere. Maybe that's because we compare inside Europe. What if we compare with other parts of the world, the campaigning? Maybe we would say that, hey, that's really European public sphere, because when you compare it to Asian news coverage of election campaigns or American election campaigns, it's quite similar. I don't know. I will end here, and I realized that I probably missed a lot of interesting research in this overview. Maybe you found something interesting. If you want this presentation, I will be happy to send it to you. Just contact me and I will send an email with the presentation. And now I'm finished. Thank you.